Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel. In this video, I will talk about the language of feedback, which is somehow related to reflective teaching. As you remember, hopefully, I have talked about observation in several different forms of it. I have mentioned self-observation, peer observation, student observation, and supervisor observation. Now, this observation, again, if you recall, gives a chance to the teacher to reflect on their practice and a chance, if they want to, of course, to modify and improve their teaching. In case of peer and supervisor observations, if we want classroom observations to serve their aim, we should be very careful when giving feedback. Feedback is about attempting to modify and improve someone's behavior or action and ensure that they do not repeat the same mistake again. Validity and content are important when giving key feedback, but the language that we use will often determine its success. If the language of the feedback is confrontational, the listener will become defensive and will stop listening. When the feedback begins with you, it becomes or it sounds like an accusation and it becomes personal. For example, if as the observer I say, you didn't use the pre-activity, you should have. Or your transitions were not smooth. You didn't wait long enough for students to answer. Or you didn't give clear instructions. As you can hear, this is like you did this, you didn't do this kind of accusation will cause listener to stop listening as they will be too busy trying to find the words, prepare the answer, prepare the response to justify what they have done. They will start thinking if or whether the feedback is fair and reasonable. Using I statements is safer, in my opinion, because they reflect the observer's perception rather than putting the blame on the observee or making any judgments or accusations. How about this one? How does this sound? I needed a pre-activity. Without it, I didn't feel ready to do the listening activity itself. Now, this is how I felt. This is what I needed rather than you, okay? Now, after mentioning the problematic issue or the area, the observer should talk about its impact. Okay, I needed this. What was the impact of it? By not using a pre-activity, students don't feel that they are engaged. There isn't enough scaffolding. Students or I don't feel cognitively, emotionally, and linguistically ready for the main task, for the main activity. I may be unable or to do the activity or fail to do the activity. Now, I know that it's very hard to be descriptive, and I believe it's much easier to be evaluative. Sometimes observers feel that they should correct a behavior, correct something or someone. However, they should try to give constructive feedback more often than corrective feedback. The observer and the observee should work together if they want this observation to be successful. So they should come together and come up with an observation protocol before the observation even takes place. They should decide on particular teaching and learning behaviors or actions to be observed. I suggest this should be limited to 2, 3, at most 4 things, because then the observer will be overwhelmed, will lose the track of the behavior that they are observing. The observer and the observee should also decide on the time of the observation and the time for the feedback. They may come up with a checklist or a questionnaire or a kind of a survey. You may Google them. There are literally hundreds of them on internet, and use those for observation, or they may even write their own observation sheet. The observee should provide the observer with the lesson plan. Maybe not too detailed, but the observer should be able to see the steps of the lesson. And the observee should also provide the observer with certain notes on specific issues in that particular class. Maybe warn the observer about certain possible problems or certain learners who need specific attention. Okay? Because the observer, don't forget, is a guest, is a visitor. They do not know the conditions of your learners. Before the observation, the observee should explain what is going to happen to the students. The students should know that the observer is going to be there just to observe the teacher and the learning situation. So they should feel comfortable and relaxed and act naturally, act real. The observer should arrive a few minutes before the class, a few minutes early before the class. Sit somewhere that is out of the way, but allows them to see and hear what is happening in the classroom. During the observation, the observer should keep a neutral expression on their face. And they should not interact with or help students while the observee is teaching. That may be really distracting. After the lesson, the observer should leave the class together with the observee and, of course, should thank them. Both the observee and the observer should make sure the post-observation meeting happens at the arranged time. And remember, giving feedback is always better when the memory is fresh. So that should not take long after the actual teaching observation. The observee should be given a chance to talk about their reflections on their own experience first. So self-observation should come first. And then the observer can take the stage and start giving their feedback. While giving feedback, observers should try to give the feedback, as I've said before, as soon as possible after the class, because the memory is still fresh. Observers should try to describe what they observed using their notes, referring to their notes, and they should not be biased. They should focus on tasks, activities, techniques, approach, etc., and not focus on personality. Observers should ask observees to comment and ask questions and not to impose their own ideas and opinions. Like, for example, you first showed this slide. Why did you show this slide first? Let's hear what the observee has to say about that, okay? Observers should be constructive, and they should try not to make any negative criticisms or accusations, actually. They should be informative and try not to be opinionated. They should be balanced, and they should not only focus on problems, they should also know when to praise what worked well in the classroom. They should try to give advice and suggestions if observees ask for these. Okay, and the advice or suggestions should be based on scientific knowledge or information rather than their personal opinion or what they would have done. Well, now let's look at this process from the observee's eyes. When observees are getting feedback, they should try to be open, and they should avoid being defensive. This is not a court, okay? This is not the judgment time. Observees should know how to accept praise. There's no need to be extremely modest. Observees should listen actively, carefully, and try to avoid imposing their views, but trying to understand what the other person's views are. They should reflect and try to dismiss things that they may disagree with, okay? Because we have a tendency of hearing what we want to hear and avoiding what we don't want to hear. We shouldn't do that. We should be all ears for any kind of comment coming from the observer. They should explore, and they should not be passive. They can use this opportunity to find out how they can change, how they can develop, how they can improve themselves. Okay, they should commit to the feedback and should not avoid it. Well, remember, the desire to change and become better has to come from inside. Unless we are willing and convinced, we won't change. And even then, change is not going to be easy. Well, I can only suggest you should be open to change and new ideas, because you never know. They may solve most of the problems that you suffer from. Well, that's all I have for this video. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more videos. Wish you all the best. Bye.